Okay, hello and welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to introduce you to a new concept that I've come up with as a video. I'm going to be predicting the chase worthiness of the masterpieces and mythics from the Ether Drift set. You know, I played around with some of them, but not a lot of them. And I gotta be honest, this set was pretty underwhelming to me. Not a lot of chase cards, I would say, personally. So the way I'm going to do this tier list here is I changed up the criteria and the tiers to reflect a little bit more of what I mean when I put these in chase or not. So basically, I would say that the cards that are worth chasing are in the God tier or meta impacting phase. Fun cards could be good to collect, but aren't necessarily going to be ones that you need to spend a lot of resources on. Situational cards, same sort of thing, except these aren't even necessarily super fun cards to build around. They just might come in handy in certain situations. And then the last tier are basically the ones that are not chase worthy and would be pretty much a waste of resources to go for. So I'm going to go through every card here and just give you my thoughts on if I think they are worth chasing or not. So let's get into it. Okay, first card, Adaptive Omnitool. It's an equipment artifact for 17 mana. You get 3 shields. At the beginning of your turn, your creatures get +1/+1 for each artifact you control. When your first creature attacks, fetch the first artifact card from your library. That card gains full mana. We always love full mana cards, especially ones that can continuously get you cards that get you full mana. So I could see this card being very useful in a lot of situations for support casting objectives, for artifact casting objectives, and also just for if you have artifacts that really impact the board when they enter the battlefield. So things like Portal to Phyrexia, or even cards like Pyromancer's Goggles would be really good to have in here. So 17 mana for a colorless card is a little high, but there are ways that we're going to be able to cheat this one out. I think this one has the potential to be meta impacting. I don't have it yet, so I don't know for sure how well it really works in practice, but I'm going to go ahead and say that this one is possibly meta impacting. So we'll put it there. Next one, we got Aetherflux Conduit. When you cast a spell card, increase this card's level by X. X is equal to that card's cost. At the beginning of your turn, this card's level is 100 or more. You may discard your hand and draw 6 cards. If you do, cards in your hand cost 0 to cast until end of turn, then this card's level becomes 1. This card I do own, and I have played with it a little bit. The problem with this card is that if you are able to create a deck that can get your level to 100 easily, or at least in a reasonable amount of time, then you don't need a card like this. You're probably running a lot of high gem conversion, which is then going to fuel the rest of your cards. By the time you get to your next turn, you're probably going to already have most of your things in your hand already ready to go, or something of that sort. You're probably in a loop also, so you probably aren't even trying to get to another turn. So this card ends up being situational at best, but it's really not a chase card. It sounds a lot better than it actually is. It needed to have something like level 50 for it to be actually functional in most decks that would want it. Even if at 50 is a little too cheap, then maybe 60 or something, just so that, 2 template discoveries don't put the level right where you can spam this. But if you're running a deck that can reliably cast template discovery, Golden Wish, Chaos Warp, etc., then you don't really need this card. So this one is going to be in a void for me. Okay, next card. We got Aetheric Amplifier. Artifact, 4 shields, with boost 3 for 7 mana. At the beginning of your turn, convert 3 gems to one of the colors of your greatest mana bonuses. Boost 3, at the beginning of combat on your turn, your first creature gets +X/+X. X is the number of creatures and creature reinforcements you control, up to 15. I use this card a lot. I think it's a little less effective Cryptex, basically. Cryptex converts 5, this converts 3, but it costs 3 less mana, so you're usually going to be able to match into one of your colors and put this on the board if it's in your hand. So it's pretty cheap to get out, and you get a lot out of it. So I do think that you will see this card a lot more once we get more players with it, because Cryptex is one of the most popular cards in Standard right now, and this is a good supplement to that, because for 17 mana, Cryptex and this, you're going to be converting 8 gems to your Planeswalker's color every turn, and that is amazing, and that will get you a lot of mana over time. So I think this one is meta impacting, so we're going to go ahead and put that over there. All right, next one. Basri, Tomorrow's Champion. Human Knight, 2/1 with cycling for 6 mana. Cycling 6, exert 2, create 3 cat tokens. When you cycle this card, your cat creatures gain double strike and prevent damage until end of turn. So this one's going to be super slotted into one type of deck, which is going to be a cat tribal deck. And yeah, I mean, there are some of those out there, but they're really more just like fun decks to play. I don't see anybody really using them for a serious coalition play or anything like that. So the card itself is a little kind of meh. It does a lot, but it doesn't do anything all that powerful. I mean, your cat's getting double strike and prevent damage. It's going to be a situational play there. It can create a decent amount of tokens for itself, so I could see it being used in very specific niche decks. So I don't think this one's going to be much of a chase card. I don't think that this card itself is even really the big engine in a cat tribal deck. That's going to be something like Healer of the Pride or Ocelot Pride, anything like that. I just don't see anybody really going out of their way to get this. They might have fun if they do, but it's not going to be one to chase. So this is going to go into the avoid pile. All right, what do we got next? We got Bloodghast, 10/2 with haste, 16 mana, mono black card, and it is a vampire spirit, so it's got some pretty relevant creature subtypes there. This creature can't block, that's fine. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if your opponent has 50 or life or less, this creature gains death touch until end of turn. It hasn't been that relevant for me yet, but let me finish here. When you cast a land card, if this card is in your graveyard, return this card from your graveyard into play under your control. So this makes it a very easy include into Grist. The haste, putting a bunch of these in to play in one turn or in one instance can be really devastating. I think this card is probably going to be meta impacting because you can sneak sneak out some wins with it with the haste, and bringing out a bunch of them at a time if you're really milling your own deck is going to be pretty effective, especially when you need to just close out a game and you don't have anything else in a play. You play a land and bring out a bunch of these from your graveyard and hopefully swing for the win. So I do think that this card will see play in a lot of events where that is relevant. So I can see this one meta impacting. It's kind of for me personally, on the cusp of fun and meta impacting. But yeah, I think this is a good card, and I do think that this one is a pretty decent chase if you feel that you want to add something like this to your strategy. So let's go ahead and call this meta impacting. All right, what do we got next? Boros Charm. Spell card, 17 mana, white and red. Deal 8 damage to each opposing creature and to your opponent's planeswalker. Creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. Your creatures gain shield counter 2. This is one that I have been playing. It's a very fun card. I used it a lot when I first pulled it, but I haven't really used it that much since. The most relevant part of this card is actually the shield counter 2, because of so much removal happening in Standard. You're going to want to have a way to have all your creatures last a few more turns, and shield counters are a really good way of doing that. It's not that they can't get rid of them, but it definitely limits the options to get them off the board quickly. So it's really good anti-Rakdos insurance for you, so it's relevant in that way. The double strike helps for certain things. Dealing 8 damage to each opposing creature and opponent's planeswalker is pretty solid. 8 damage will take out a lot of opposing creatures if they haven't really done much to get their board state going. So this card definitely has a lot of uses. I don't know if it's going to be meta impacting necessarily, because every time I put it into my decks, it's one of the first things to go. So it doesn't have a ton of great utility outside of the shield counter, but it is a card that I think it will be worth playing in certain situations. But it's right to me in between meta impacting and fun. But I am just going to go ahead and put it in the fun category, because I just end up not using it just due to the fact that we only have 10 cards that we can play. So that is where I'm going to put it. All right, next is Brightglass Gearhulk. 20 mana, first strike and trample, 4/4. Artifact construct, it is green and white. When this creature enters the battlefield, pick one of the first 4 artifact, enchantment, or creature cards from your library. If that card is not named Brightglass Gearhulk, put that card into play under your control. This is fetch the battlefield on ETB, which is an amazing effect. It is always a relevant effect. I think that this is probably the #1 creature in this set, and gonna be one of the #1 creatures in standard when it goes from being exclusive to being craftable. I think everybody's gonna be playing this card that has a green and white planeswalker. So you're gonna see this card a lot. It's gonna be meta impacting. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a god tier card, because the effect is so strong and you're going to be seeing it a lot, and it's going to make certain decks so much better. Being able to fetch an enchantment or creature from your library is probably going to be a little bit more impactful. I mean, being able to fetch an enchantment from your library in Legacy is crazy, because this is going to be in a lot of Omni decks now. So yeah, have fun with this one. And yeah, this is going to be our first god tier card from this set. Our next card is definitely going to be a drop off from what we just saw here, but let's see if it's a good one. All right, Coalstoke Gearhulk is a menace, death touch, artifact construct for 12 mana, 5/4, black and red. Pretty decent stats. When this creature enters the battlefield, return the first creature from target graveyard to the battlefield under your control. Then that creature gains finality. I really like this card. I think it's a pretty solid creature with a good effect. It has relevance because of Revolving Planeswalk, the one where you have to summon creatures with Death Touch and Menace. So that helps you get there pretty quickly. Really, the only downside is creature gaining finality, so you can't keep pulling it out of the graveyard. It'll go to your exile instead. But yeah, this is a solid creature. I don't know if it's quite meta impacting. It is a really good card. I don't know how often we'll be seeing it. I feel like it has the potential to be meta impacting. But for now, I think I might put it more in the fun category, because it's got a really strong ETB, and it'll be a good pairing with a lot of other creatures. The more I talk about this card, the more I feel like it's going to be meta impacting. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it's going to go in the meta impacting slot there. So, all right. Next one. Daretti, Rocketeer Engineer, 14 mana for just a 1/5. Goblin Artificer. At the beginning of your turn, this creature gets +X/+0 until the beginning of your next turn. X is the greatest mana cost among artifacts you control. Okay. When this creature enters the battlefield or attacks, return a random artifact card from your graveyard to play under your control. Okay, this has a really strong effect. I like that it can continuously trigger its strongest effect too. So yeah, I think this card is potentially meta impacting, but it's also pretty niche because you need to build around artifacts and all that, and they need to be you need to have a way to be putting a bunch of artifacts in your graveyard. And there are ways. In red now especially has some decent ways of putting cards into your graveyard, especially if you pair this with Daretti, the Planeswalker, whose first ability puts cards into your graveyard. So I think this card is really good for that Daretti Planeswalker. So he's a little bit more niche than the effects all suggest. So it's definitely better than a situational card. But I don't know if it's quite meta impacting just because it's a monocolored card. So you're not going to see it in black decks, which is where you probably would want to use it more. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this one in the fun category. Next, we got Drogskol Reaver. Spirit for 10 mana is a double strike lifelinker with flying. It's only 3/5, but that's still pretty good. It is a spirit. When you gain life for the first time on your turn, draw a card. If you can't, convert 4 gems to blue gems. So basically, if your hand is full when you gain life, you convert 4 gems to blue. I haven't used this card yet. I just pulled it the other day, but I just haven't gotten around to trying it yet. I think this has the potential to be meta impacting, but I don't think it will necessarily. I think it's a good card, but I don't think it's gonna be seeing a bunch of play everywhere. Like, I don't think that you're gonna see this card and think, oh crap, I have to deal with this one. But I do think that on your side, if you build it up with the right combo of creatures and other things, I think it can be a really good card. So I'm going to put it in the fun category. I think it's better than situational, but I don't think it's good enough to be meta impacting. All right, Fireshrieker, support card artifact, 17 mana for 4 shields. At the beginning of your turn, your creatures get +3/+3 until the beginning of your next turn. When a creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gains double strike. Okay, this card sounds nuts, but in practice, it's pretty good. It's definitely my definition of a fun card. I don't think it's necessarily meta impacting the way that it makes it seem. I think that you're going to see it in some decks, and it's going to be really annoying to see your opponent creatures get double strike, but it's not bringing a lot more to the table than that. I definitely have it in some decks that are going for speed, and it helps with that because it'll win games a little faster. But I don't think it's very meta impacting because double strike, even though it's a very strong effect, it's really only effective when your creatures are in the attack phase or blocking phase. So there's a lot of chances for this to lose its effectiveness by not only getting rid of the creatures that you're going to be putting double strike on, but getting to the point where the double strike isn't even that relevant. So straight up a fun card, so we're going to put it there. All right, what's next? Galvanic Blast. Spell card, 7 mana, red. Deal 7 damage to target creature and 7 damage to your opponent's planeswalker. If you control an artifact card, deal 14 damage to target creature and 14 damage to your opponent's planeswalker instead. So this is a pretty solid red burn card because it can deal damage to your opposing planeswalker as well as your creature, as well as opposing creatures without any real downside to you. 7 is kind of an awkward number to be hitting for. You can build it up to 14 just by, playing even gold tokens. So this card is very cool for the niche that it would fit in, which is one of those like spell slinging red decks that are meant to deal damage and win by just, overrunning your opponent with damage dealt over and over again. So not a very popular archetype to play right now, but I can see it being more relevant later if those kinds of decks see more support. But as of now, you're probably not going to see this card a lot, even though it's a pretty fun and pretty effective card in that type of deck. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the situational row. All right, what do we got next? Gastal Thrillroller is a 14 mana, 3 shield card, support card, artifact, vehicle. Okay, it's a vehicle. It's got crew 3, which is not bad. When a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +4/+2 and gains trample and haste. When this card is destroyed, return this card from your graveyard to play under your control, then this card gains finality. So this is actually pretty similar to the Origins card, the one that gives you haste. Shoot, what's the name of it? It's a rare support that gives your non-token creatures haste when they enter the battlefield. Yeah, sorry. But with the upside of having it come back into play if it's destroyed, that's actually pretty relevant. I feel like this is a pretty cool card that I can see getting some play. I don't think it'll necessarily be quite good enough to be meta impacting, but I do think it's a solid card with a good effect, and I love that it has some built-in recursion. So I think that's what really puts it over the top for me, is the fact that it can come back to the battlefield right away if it's been destroyed. I feel like those supports that give your creatures haste can sometimes fizzle for that reason. So pretty solid design for this card. So I like it. I just don't know if it's necessarily going to be meta impacting that people are going to be using this a lot. So I will put this in the fun category. All right, what do we got? All right, Hazoret Godseeker, 14 mana, 5/3 with prevent damage, haste, and is a god. This creature can't attack and can't block. At the beginning of your turn, your creatures with power 2 or less gain unblockable until end of turn. Boost 4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, this creature loses can't attack and can't block until the beginning of your next turn. The fact that you need other creatures attacking before this card really does much for you makes it a pretty bad card in my opinion. You have to get to boost 4 before it can do anything really. So if you start with this card, don't get any other creatures to boost your level up, boost your speed up more, then this card just kind of sits there for a long time. And for 14 mana, this card would have to cost a lot more to even have me consider playing this in a serious way. But yeah, I don't like this card at all. I think it's bad. I would avoid it. All right, next we got Ketramose The New Dawn, which is 12 mana, another god, which is 5/5. It's white and black, but it's also got lifelink, prevent damage, and menace. When you exile a card from your hand, if there are 7 or less loyalty gems on the board, you draw a card and lose 1 life. This effect can trigger up to 3 times per turn. So this card actually has a lot going for it. Gauze spoiled this one. I know he wasn't like crazy about when he first played it, but I think he found it to be fun. And I played with it a little bit, and yeah, it's definitely got some good things going for it, especially if you make it into a blocker. It's going to be really difficult for your opponent to deal with it if they're not running removal. Not a lot of PvP players aren't running removal, but it's going to be a good PvE card. You just set this up so that it blocks, and not a lot of things are going to go through it. And then it's got menace, so it's going to be able to go through other things. So, and it's got lifelink. You kind of have cycling happening with it in a way, because you exile a card that you don't need and hopefully get to the ones you want. So it's a pretty good deck filter card as well. So yeah, I like this card. I think it's pretty cool. I would still put it more in the fun category because it's got a lot of good effects, and I do think that it's a solid creature, but I just don't think that everybody's going to be rushing out to go play this creature. But it does have its uses. So yeah, I think it's a fun card because it's got a lot of really relevant things happening with it. Next, Loot the Pathfinder is a 12 mana creature, tricolor, which is cool. 2/4 with vigilance, double strike, and haste. I do like all of that. It's a little weak though, but we do have a lot of ways to buff creatures right now, so this will make it a little bit more resilient and powerful. The problem with this card is the exhaust. Discard your hand and draw 6 cards, deal 6 damage to target creature, then gain 12 mana. You have to be very careful with this card because of that exhaust. You don't want to discard your hand at the wrong time, and you're most likely going to do it, especially if you've been playing this game for a while. It's going to you're going to just exile a card from your hand out of habit, and you're going to get rid of things that you wanted to play that turn just because you wanted to make room in your hand. So it's a very awkward card to play with. I think some people will find this card fun. They'll find good reasons to use that exhaust, but I found it to be a very annoying card to play with, and yeah, I just avoid it for the exhaust because I always find myself triggering it at the wrong time. So I'm going to go ahead and, for me, call this a card to avoid. Other people might disagree, but I'm going to stick with that assessment. Next is March of the World Ooze, 16 mana, 3 support, enchantment. When this support enters the board, your creatures get +6/+6 and gain the Ooze subtype. Okay, so there's one to pair with loot. When your opponent casts a spell or support card, create an elephant token. So you're going to be creating tokens on your side when your opponent does things. I don't know. I don't think that either of these effects are strong enough to really warrant a slot in most people's decks, especially in Platinum. This might be a solid card for newer players because it does a decent amount for you that would help you in the lower level of gameplay. But as you get further and further along into the game, cards like this are going to be much less relevant for you. So I would say for the most part, this would be a card for people to avoid. I don't think it's worth chasing at all. But if you do happen to get it and you're a newer player, you might enjoy it. Got Mimeoplasm Revered One, 22 mana to cast for a 1/1. It is tricolored in an Ooze. When this creature enters the battlefield, exile up to the first 4 creature cards from your graveyard. Then this creature gets +X/+X. X is 3 times the amount of cards that were exiled this way. Create a copy of target non-token creature you control into the battlefield under your control for activate 3. This card is pretty fun, actually. I played with it a little bit. I haven't really tried to build around it yet. I can see some decks where this card will be very relevant. There's Xenagos, who pulls creatures from his exile with the 3rd ability. So that's an easy inclusion there. Pairing this with Loot, the Key to Everything, and or Dragonhawk, connecting the dots. Anything that pulls things from your exile into play. Omnitool, gonna be a good one. Even when you're not using those cards, this creature can still get pretty beefy quickly. So it's a fun card. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily meta impacting. It is pretty good ability, but I just don't think that a card that this niche will see widespread play. But I do think it's worth playing around with if you do get it. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a chase card, but I do think it's a high-end fun card. What do we got next? We got Monument to Endurance, 17 mana for 8 shield support card artifact, which is pretty good. When you discard a card, create a gold token. Then you draw a card and your opponent loses 3 life. When you draw a card, the support loses 1 shield. So it's kind of a weird card. You want to discard cards with it, so you're probably going to be putting it in a deck that has something like Time Reversal, Wheel of Fortune, something like that. You're going to be losing shields, but if you pair this with a card like Daretti, you could bring it back into play and create a bunch of gold tokens that way. So I think this is a decent gold token creator. which I really like playing with gold tokens. So I can see myself trying to figure out a way to make this card useful. Right now, I would say it's more of a situational card because you really need to put it into decks that use discard as a strategy for yourself. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and put it in the situational pile. If people find a way to really take advantage of it, then maybe I'll move it up. But for now, I think it's pretty good where it is. All right, what's next? It is Mu Yanling, Wind Rider, Human Wizard Pilot, 12 mana, 2/4. I wonder if the pilot is that relevant. When this creature enters the battlefield, create an Ether Bike token, which I think is like gives your first creature a buff according to the amount of shields on that support. At the beginning of your turn, your creatures gain flying. When a creature deals combat damage to opposing planeswalker, draw a card. That to me is the best part of this card. When a creature drawing a card at the end of your turn so that you can set up for your next turn is pretty good. It's a slightly underrated effect right now. I don't think a lot of people are playing it, but in decks like with Omnitool, it's really good because you can just put those cards into your exile right away at the start of your turn. Just put them into play with their third ability when you get there. So I do like this effect. However, this is a mythic, and I feel like this card is a rare at best. I think that its levels is like uncommon, like the amount of utility it brings to you. Maybe that's short changing it a bit, but I don't know. I wouldn't call this card a mythic level card. It would be a pretty good rare. Let's put it that way. So for that reason, I'm going to make it an avoid chasing. Next up, we got Muraganda Raceway. It's a land with boost 7, 15 mana, 4 shields, colorless. When this support enters the board, the first vehicle card in your hand gains full mana. There's probably some shenanigans we can get into with that one. The problem is there aren't a lot of vehicles in standard that we are really dying to get on the field. This would be great if we had some of those awesome vehicle cards that we had back in the days of Kaladesh. Cards like Sovereign and what's it called? The one with Vigilance. But we don't have creatures like that right now, so it's not as cool of an effect. Boost 7 at the beginning of your turn, convert 4 gems to the most present color on the board. For a land, man, that takes a long time to get there for that boost 7. When you want to play a card like this, it's going to be earlier in the game and not after you've had your creatures attack 7 times. So I don't like the design of this card. I feel like it's a lot of wasted potential. The vehicle card gaining full mana would be better if we had more relevant vehicles to play with. So I don't think that this card is really worth chasing at all. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the avoid pile. All right, Nissa, Worldsoul Speaker, 18 mana, Elf Druid, 3/3. Landfall, creature and support cards in your hand gain 10 mana. This card I played around with a little bit. I do think it's good. The problem with it is a little bit like the problem that the Aetherflux Conduit has, is the fact that if you have a deck that is reliably creating a lot of landfalls for you, it's not going to be adding a lot more to it because it can help. I think it does help a little bit more than the Aetherflux Conduit because you can trigger this multiple times a turn as long as you're landfalling a lot. But if you're landfalling a lot, you're probably getting a lot of mana from that. And so this card becomes a little less relevant. I do think it is a better card than the Aetherflux Conduit by a wide margin. But it isn't like a god tier meta impacting card that we all thought it would be when we first saw it previewed. But it is definitely better than just a situational card. but it's not nearly as good as people thought it might be. And I don't see them giving us a lot of gem conversion bombs, because you saw what happened with Galta and Temple Discovery. They just basically took over the meta. So I think they're going to be more careful with that going forward. So there's not going to be a lot of ways to create landfalls or create loops based on landfalls like we've had in Legacy. So this might be more of a Legacy impactor than Standard. I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the fun category. It has the potential to move up to be meta impacting later on, but for now, I don't think it impacts the meta that much yet. Next, we got Oildeep Gearhulk. Man, I love this card. 10 mana, lifelink with ward, 4/4 artifact construct, blue and black. Ward, drain 10 mana from hand. When this creature enters the battlefield, your opponent discards their first and last card. So it's basically, just for 4 mana more, it's basically an infinite obliteration with lifelink attached to it, and it's got ward, so it's not super easy to get off the field. And yeah, if you pair this with cards that you can, blink this card with, exile and put it back into play, or even with Extravagant Replication. This is my favorite pairing with this card actually is Extravagant Replication, because you can just choose it to copy into play and trigger that ETB. And so every turn you're going to be making your opponent discard their first and last card. So if you pair this with something like Aklizots, or really anything that destroys your opponent's hand, it's just really difficult for your opponent to get going. So very awesome card. I'm not seeing a lot yet, but I do feel like it has the potential to be meta impacting, because it's going to just be one of those annoying cards like Aklizots that you're just not going to want to face very often. Those cards that have discard on ETB have always been super annoying. Cards like Xander, for example. So yeah, this card, I'm going to put in the meta impacting, just because I feel like that's where it's going to end up the more people that get it. Next, we got On Wings of Gold, 12 mana Masterpiece Enchantment, 4 mana, or 4 shields. At the beginning of your turn, your creature tokens get +1/+1 for each of their reinforcements. Then, if you control a zombie creatures you control gain flying until the beginning of your next turn. Not sure why it needs to be only until the beginning of your next turn, but whatever. When a card leaves your graveyard, create a white zombie token. Okay, this card can get nuts. It's a really good token generator, because all you need to do is just basically fill your graveyard with a bunch of cards and then exile it, and you create as many white zombie tokens. You'll be surprised at how many white zombie tokens you make when you do that. The problem with this card is the problem that every token generating deck has. Animations are too slow. It takes too long to resolve a big stack of tokens. So for that reason, I don't like playing these kinds of cards, even though they are very strong, because you just have to sit there forever. In the days of Streets of New Capenna, we had that enchantment card that creates a bunch of citizens that you have to just sit there forever waiting for your citizens to finish spawning, or even worse, if Greg is playing them. Yeah, it's just really annoying. So it is a good card. I think that you do have to build for it. And so I'm going to put it in the fun category, even though waiting for tokens to spawn is not fun for me. But that doesn't mean other people won't play it. So that's where it's going to go for me personally. Other people might rate that one higher because it's one that they really want to play. But for me, until they change the way tokens animate in this game, I'm just not going to probably bother playing with cards like that very often, unless it's for very specific objectives that need to be hit. Up next, we got Oviya, Automech Artisan, 14 mana, a 1/2 human artificer. When a creature you control becomes blocked, that creature gains trample. Oh, good for them. At the end of your turn, if you have a creature or vehicle card in your hand, put the first creature or vehicle card from your hand into play under your control. That part of the card is really interesting. I just got this one, so I haven't really played around with it, but that is actually a pretty relevant ability. Yeah, because you can just put this into play. It doesn't have to attack for it to trigger. So I really like that part of it. So yeah, I think this card has the potential to be a fun one that you use in certain situations. I do think this is going to be more of a situational card though. Being a 1/2 creature is a little bit too weak, so you need to supplement it with other cards, and you may or may not want to dedicate cards in your deck to be able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one a situational card. I think you'll find a lot of situations for it to be a relevant card, but it's not going to be super meta impacting, I don't think. Next up, we got Peema Trailblazer, which is an Elephant Warrior, 3/3 with Trample for 17 mana. When this creature deals combat damage, increases card's level by X. X is equal to this creature's power. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may have this creature get +Y/+Y. If you do, this card's level becomes 1. Exhaust, your creatures get +Y/+Y. Y is equal to this card's level. It's a kind of a complicated card, and it takes a little bit of understanding how it works. The more it hits for, the stronger it can make you and the rest of your cards. So it's a bit slow to get going. It's similar in power to something like a Titan's Vanguard, but Titan's Vanguard doesn't have to deal with levels and stuff. I feel like if Titan's Vanguard and this card's abilities were switched to each other, Titan's Vanguard would be the masterpiece and Peema Trailblazer would be the rare. It is a pretty strong card, but I think that there are better cards that do similar things. However, this card can be pretty fun to play around with. I feel like it's not the best choice for a card of this type. So it's a low fun card for me. Pia Nalar, Chief Mechanic, 10 mana, 2/4, creature, human artificer, tricolor card, so it can go in a lot of different decks. When a creature you control deals combat damage, if you control a vehicle card, your vehicle supports gain 2 shield, then your first creature gains trample. At the end of your turn, create a Nalar Ether Jet token. So this card does a lot and has a lot of interesting abilities. The Nalar Ether Jet creates a racer pilot. The racer pilot grows in power equal to the amount of shields on the vehicle supports. I think it's like the highest shield of vehicle support you have into play. It gets buffed by that much every turn. It's a decent little card, and it creates a solid token there. The problem is it does take up a lot of space on your side of the board with having this creature in play and the racer pilot. You're taking away slots for 2 creatures that might do more for you, are more useful in terms of just gameplay. But it is kind of a fun card to mess around with. I haven't played around with it a lot, so I haven't really tried to break this card and make it really shine. But I think there is potential for this one to be a pretty solid card. And I think if you pair it with other racer pilot creators, then maybe it's even better. So I do think that this card is one to build around, but I just don't know if that build is going to be anywhere near top tier. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one, it's on the cusp of fun and situational. I would say because it's not quite as strong as the other fun cards in here, or it just takes a lot more effort to be as strong, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the situational category. Priest of the Crossing, 17 mana, 3/3 bird, zombie bird cleric. When this creature enters the battlefield, fetch the first vehicle card from your library. That card gains full mana. That's pretty solid. At the beginning of each combat, creatures you control get +X/+X. X is the number of vehicle cards you control. Okay, definitely the best part of this card is being able to fetch a vehicle into play. Well, not into play, but into your hand with full mana. I could see that being useful with certain decks. This might be a better legacy impacting card because you can play this card and get a flagship ready to go and put it into play. So I probably use it there more than in standard. Just because I don't love a lot of the vehicles we have right now. And then the buff is just whatever. It's fine. Because if it's not counting reinforcements, really how many vehicle cards are you going to have into play? In standard, not that many. In legacy, you could get a decent amount going. So yeah, I think this is a little bit more of a legacy impacting card. And even then, it's going to be pretty niche. So, oh gosh, is this situational or avoid? I'm going to say it's situational. I'll be a little bit generous to it. Next, we got Pyrewood Gearhulk. 7/7 for 13 mana with Vigilance and Unblockable is pretty good, actually. It's an artifact construct, green and red. When this creature enters the battlefield, your creatures get +2/+2 and gain Unblockable until end of turn. Then those creatures gain Vigilance until the beginning of your next turn. The Unblockable is actually fairly relevant when we got cards like Sab-Sunen in the game now, getting around things like Phyrexian Vindicator and Atraxa and things like that can be, pretty scary blockers. So, but the problem is, I would like this card a lot more if it got these effects to be permanent. For once a turn, it can be very situational. But yeah, it's a decent card. 13 mana, 7/7 for that also has Vigilance is actually not bad. I think if you're a newer player and you pull this, you're going to like this card a lot. But yeah, it just doesn't do a lot at the platinum level. But it's not bad. I don't want to say it's a card you should avoid necessarily. So in the situations it's good for are kind of few and far between. You kind of have to build to make this a more solid blocker. But I do like the effects that it has. I just wish that they were permanent. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the situational pile as well. Next up, we got Radiant Lotus. 18 mana for a 4-shield artifact. When this support is destroyed or loses a reinforcement, convert 5 gems to the colors of your greatest mana bonuses. When this support loses shield, convert 5 gems to the colors of your greatest mana bonuses. Yeah, so this card has the potential to be really strong. I just have to figure out a way to actually build for it. I don't have this card yet, but it does seem like it can be very useful. I just got to kind of sit down and think about what will be the best way to really maximize the potential of this card. But I think it's very solid card that has the potential to possibly be meta impacting if somebody figures out a way to reliably make it lose shields and stuff. God, where am I going to put this one? It's tough. I'm not totally sure where I want to put it yet. I will put it in the fun category for now because I feel like without a way to reliably make it lose shields, you're only going to be hitting it every so often. It's going to be even harder than like a mana field. If this had mana field, then this would be meta impacting for sure, but I don't think it's quite there yet. But I do think that this has the potential to be a very good card. So I'm going to go ahead and just put it in the fun category for now, just because I don't know where else to put it yet. I think it's better than a situational card, but it might just be that. So maybe later on I might have to move it up and down. So we'll see. All right, Repurposing Bay, 14 mana, 1 shield, support card artifact. When you discard a card, draw a card. When this support is destroyed, fetch the first artifact card with the greatest mana cost from your library. That card gains full mana. Okay, so this card is interesting because there are a lot of different ways to build around it. Gauss is a big fan of this card. This is a very good card if you're playing a lot of discard strategies because it helps you not lose the cards that you would want to keep in your hand. So it's going to be great for things like Jace Reawaken, Dak Faden, planeswalkers and creatures and stuff that benefit from having cards in your hand, or you discarding them for an effect, and then this kind of erases the downside that you would get for it. Depending on how you want to build around this can be the single artifact in your deck, so that you always fetch a Repurposing Bay when you get when it gets destroyed, and it's going to be destroyed because it only has one shield. But you can try and build a deck that has other strong artifacts in it that it will fetch and gain full mana for. So I haven't quite decided if it's meta impacting. I play with it for a bit, and I do like it, but I just feel like there aren't enough slots in a lot of my decks to justify putting it in there. I have to, it's a little bit more niche than I necessarily want for a card like this. I don't know if it's going to be meta impacting. It has the potential to be, but I don't know if a lot of people really care enough about the effects that it has for it to be something that's going to be that widespread. I think it's a very good card, but I don't think it quite crosses the meta impact threshold. So I'm going to put it high in the fun tier. All right, next up we got Riptide Gearhulk, 20 mana, double strike, 2/5 artifact construct, white and blue. Got boost 5. Prowess, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Boost 5. At the beginning of your turn, return the first opposing creature and a random support to its owner's hand. Random opposing support. Yeah, this card is pretty strong. I played with it a little bit. To be honest, I haven't really gotten to the boost 5 often enough in the right situations for it to be that relevant, but it can be. I think it's a fairly strong card in the veins of something like Agris Kos, which kind of has like a delayed removal ability, but the removal is very strong. The fact that it can bounce both creatures and supports every turn potentially makes a very strong effect. Will it impact the meta? That's one. It might. I'm going to go ahead and put it at low meta impacting because I do think it has the potential to be really annoying, and you might see it fairly often. All you need to do is just make sure that your creatures get double strike your other ones as well, so you get that boost 5 up quickly, so that when this card attacks, it's making impact as quickly as possible, because it's not a strong creature on its own as far as attacking, but it's a very solid defensive creature, I think. So defensive creatures are pretty relevant in today's meta, so I do see this one being pretty useful. All right, Sab-Sunen Luxa Embodied. Creature, God, 6/6 for 11 mana, trample, prevent damage, reach. At the beginning of your turn, this creature gets +1/+1, then draw a card. If this creature would die, you may return this creature to your hand. If you do, this card gains 8 mana. So a lot has been talked about when it comes to this card. Some people think it's OP. I personally don't. I've seen it in enough decks now that it is very annoying, and you definitely don't want it on the board if you can help it. But it's not doing a lot to help you win or make you lose necessarily. It is an annoying card to go against. It's not doing a lot to accelerate wins. So for that reason, I'm not necessarily going to put it in the God tier, although a lot of people think that this card is that level. But I do think it's meta impacting because you're going to see it a lot. It's going to give you a headache every now and again, but it's not as good as something like a Phyrexian Vindicator or even a Faithbound Judge from a few sets back. So it's way up there. It's definitely going to be a card you see a lot. So I'm going to put it on the higher end of meta impacting. Salvation Engine. Support card, artifact vehicle, 25 mana, but it does have crew 5, so you're going to be able to reduce that cost by a decent amount. At the beginning of your turn, if you control another artifact, your creatures get +2/+2. Then return the first artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. At the beginning of combat on your turn, your first creature gets +6/+10 and gains unblockable and vigilance until the beginning of your next turn. So this is definitely a card you want to pair with the right creatures, like the Gearhulk we just looked at that has double strike and everything like that is going to be really good for that because of the buff being so big and having unblockable and vigilance. Make sure that you're going to be able to attack your creature, even if they're playing something like Sab-Sunen. I don't think it's going to be meta impacting just because these cards don't get played that much. I mean, they're better than what we had in the Kamigawa set as far as vehicles go, but I don't know, things that just buff creatures are kind of low on the meta impact scale to me. This card is really good if you can get it on the board pretty reliably, and there are ways to do that. But you do need to pair it with a lot of other high rarity strong cards. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the situational pile just because it is a very good card, but you do have to jump through a decent amount of hoops for it to be very effective. So that's how I feel about it. So even though it's situational, I do think it has potential for high impact. So I'm putting it at the high end of situational. All right, what's next? Samut, the Driving Force. 60 mana, 4/5. A first strike vigilance with haste, and it's got boost 3. At the beginning of your turn, if this card is in your hand and doesn't have full mana, reduce the cost of each spell and support card in your hand by X until the beginning of your next turn. A boost 3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, your creatures get +X/+0 until the beginning of your next turn. X is equal to your speed value. Okay, I personally think that this is probably the best creature in the set that isn't meta impacting necessarily, because it does a lot of good stuff for you, but it's not going to be anything that you're going to really be like, oh man, I need to have this creature in my deck, as opposed to something that's truly meta impacting like a Galta or something like that, or even a Sab-Sunen. But it brings a lot to the table. I really like the cost reduction that you get from it, just from it being in your hand, which gives it some utility even when it's non-play, which is kind of rare in this game, actually. It can be pretty strong when it's fighting, and when it's blocking, you can build this up to be a pretty solid blocker as well. So I do like this card a lot. I think it's pretty strong, but I am going to put it at the high end of fun, because it's not quite meta impacting, but it is a card that you'll probably want to play and have a lot of fun with. Next, we got Temet, Noctimon's Will. Zombie Wizard, 12 mana, 4/4, Vigilance and Menace. Zombie Wizard, and it's tricolor. When your first creature attacks, draw a card, then gain 7 mana. When you draw a card, reinforce all zombie creatures you control. So this card is rad. It really surprised me. When I was reading this card, I didn't realize the reinforcement was permanent. So it grows in size really quickly, especially when you add just a minimal amount of extra card draw on your turn. But if you're putting this in a loop deck, this creature gets so big so fast. It's really a strong card. I think it is meta impacting. Would I put it God tier? Gosh, it's really close to God tier for me. I personally like playing this card more than Sab-Sunen myself. I think that this card is awesome. I've been using it in a few different ways. But yeah, the first creature attack, drawing a card, and then gaining 7 mana is also relevant in a lot of decks. You could play this card early. You could play this card late and have it grow quickly for you too. The only thing it's missing is haste, but you can get around that pretty easily. But yeah, this card is super strong. And if you play this also with something like Zul Ashur, that gives your other creatures zombie, this card you're going to be reinforcing everything on the board every time you draw a card. So it pairs well with so many great cards. Doubling Season, Knowledge is Power, cards like that. This card really shines with. And it's a blocker too. So even if you aren't able to play it that turn, it will help you. It'll help keep you safe when you have this giant thing blocking everything being thrown against you. So, gosh, I'm tempted to give this a God tier rating, but I'm going to put it at the high end of meta impacting because I do think this is a really good card and people just don't have it yet, or else they would be playing it a lot. And it's going to be a menace when everybody has it. Okay, next we got Territorial Aetherkite. 6/5 Cat Dragon, 13 mana, masterpiece, flying, and haste. It's also got boost too. When this creature enters the battlefield, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn. X is the number of creatures and creature reinforcements you control, up to 25. So definitely it's encouraging you to pair with a bunch of token creatures. It's cool in that way. But I also think that you can maybe pair this with something like Doubling Season or even Temet that we just saw. Then boost 2. It deals damage equal to its power to the opponent's planeswalker and to the first opposing creature. So you got to be careful not to play it against Phyrexian Vindicator. However, for everything else, it is a pretty solid ability. I think that there are definitely ways to break this one. I haven't played with this card enough to know for sure what that's going to be. But Nalthazar got to spoil it, so he's probably played with it a lot more than I have. So I do think that this card has the potential to be a lot of fun. I don't necessarily think it'll be meta impacting unless people find a way to make it just ridiculously powerful and win games in a strong deck archetype. So for that reason, I'm going to put it toward the high end of fun. It doesn't have as much utility as Samet, so I don't think it's going to be a better creature overall than her, but it is a very strong creature. And yeah, I just think I need to play around with it more to see where it will fall in the final rankings here. All right, the last ride, support card, artifact vehicle, 1 shield, but 5 mana, crew 2. At the beginning of your turn, your first creature gets +X/+X until the beginning of your turn. Next turn, X is equal to 13 minus the number of vehicle cards you control, including their reinforcements. At the end of your turn, you draw a card and lose 2 life. So really the main problem with this card is that it only has 1 shield. The effects are actually pretty good. I do like this card in theory, but man, it's so fragile. And it's not even so much that, oh, the mana cost is offset. The fragility is offset by its mana cost. The problem is it's still a card. It's going to be one of the 10 cards in your deck. So there's not a lot of room for cards like this. So you really have to build for it and kind of invest more than you might want to into a card like this to make it effective. So it's going to be, for me, a very situational card. Is it a void though? I think it has enough upside to make it possibly useful, but I don't know. I just don't. It's maybe in the high end of a void. Like it can cross into maybe a higher tier, depending on the type of deck you're running. But I do think that this is probably like, yeah, I'm gonna say this is low end situational. All right, what do we got next? All right, we got the Speed Demon, 15 mana, 8/6, haste, or not haste. It should have haste, trample, boost 1, and flying. 8/6 is actually a pretty good amount of power for a black creature. It is a demon though, and demons usually are fairly powerful. When this creature attacks, draw a card. If you can't, this creature gets +3/+0. Okay, not bad. Boost 1, at the end of your turn, gain X mana, then you lose X life. X is equal to your speed value. Okay, so that's where the speed comes from. You get a little bit of a benefit and a slight downside when you get that boost going. I don't know. I think it has the potential to be a decent card. I just don't think it's great. I don't, it's a fairly solid body, but I don't know if it brings enough to the table to be anything more than a fun card. Is it situational? Maybe. Even though it's like kind of a general purpose creature, I feel like the situation you would use this in is if you don't have anything that's a lot better. It's not a bad card for sure, but it's definitely not going to be one I personally would chase. So it's, to me, on the cusp of fun and situational. Yeah, I think I'll put this sort of high-end situational. Okay, next we got Thunderous Velocipede. 13 mana, 3 shield, support card, artifact vehicle, mono green. When a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature's base cost is 15 or less, that creature gets +2/+2. Okay. Otherwise, that creature gets 5/5 and gains trample. All right. When a vehicle support enters the board under your control, that support gains 1 shield. Okay, so there are a lot of just okay abilities attached to this card. You can get a decent amount out of it, but I don't think what you get out of it is all that impactful. Yeah, it just doesn't do enough for you in most cases to justify using it. Again, it's another card that, like, if you get it and you're kind of newer to the game, you don't have a lot of impactful cards, this one can do a decent amount for you, but it's going to be one that you drop fairly quickly as soon as you get better things. So it's not really helping your board state too much. So yeah, I think this is one for most people to avoid. Valor's Flagship, 18 mana, 5 shields. It's got cycling 14. At the beginning of combat on your turn, your first creature gets +7/+7 and gains lifelink and first strike until the beginning of your next turn. When you cycle this card, create X Racer Pilot tokens. X is the number of white gems. So it is expensive, and it doesn't have crew. So you do have to pay a lot for it if you're just going to cast it out of your hand. However, there are going to be a lot of ways to get artifacts into play. So you might want to pair this card with certain other ones that will make that quicker. The lifelink and first strike is really good. +7/+7 as a buff is also very good. But the cycling is very interesting. You got to be careful when you cycle this card because you may or may not want to drain 14 mana from your hand. However, if you're playing this with something like Healer of the Pride, this is going to be great because you can just gain all that mana back by creating all those Racer Pilot tokens. And Healer of the Pride, converting all those gems for you, will get you all that mana back. So this card, I think this card has the potential to be meta impacting. Again, it's one of those ones where it's either fun or, depending on how useful people find it in general, it has the possibility to be meta impacting. The lifelink +7/+7 is really good, and especially if you play it on a blocker, something like a Sab-Sunen, you're going to be able to gain a bunch of mana, or you're going to be able to gain a bunch of life when your opponent bashes into that creature. So I think I'm going to put it on the low end of meta impacting. I do think that this card can see a decent amount of play in the future. Next, we got Vinwixt, Verbose Host. At least I think that's how you say it. 15 mana. It's a 0/4 homunculus with boost 5. When you draw a card during your turn, create a Racer Pilot token. We like that. Creating a token just by drawing a card is pretty cool. Boost 5. At the beginning of your turn, draw a card. Then your creature cards gain 5 mana. So every creature card in your hand is going to gain 5 mana if you hit that boost 5. So I do think this is a pretty good card, actually. It's not attacking necessarily because it doesn't have power to attack, but we can, do things to fix that. It's got 2 really cool abilities to it. It's definitely going to be in the fun category, but I do think it has the potential to be meta impacting just because of the Racer Pilots being created when you draw a card. So it's going to be an excellent pairing with Satoru. So that means you can run a viable Satoru deck in mono blue. So yeah, this card, I think I'm going to put it at the high end of fun. It's too early to say if it's going to be meta impacting. It might not be the card that a lot of people want to build around. So yeah, I'm going to put this, fun for now, but never know. It might take over a little bit. Next up, we got Windfall, spell card, 8 mana. Each player discards their hand and draws X cards, then gain X mana. X is the number of cards discarded this way. So I think the main reason you would want to play this card is to disrupt your opponent's hand. You can draw a bunch of cards. I feel like if you play this at the end of your hand, if you have your hand set up where this is the last card that you cast, then you're not going to be losing a lot of cards, but your opponent has the potential to lose a lot of cards. So I think that can be strong. Even though, they get cards back, at least the new cards aren't going to have mana in them. I don't know. I think this is a very situational card. I think that it can be useful in certain decks. If you're playing hand disruption, first of all, screw you, because I hate facing those decks. But can't deny that this card has the potential to be pretty strong. So, but still, as a masterpiece, I don't know. It's a cheap card to cast at least, but it's going to be very situational. Some people really like this card. Others will probably never play it. And finally, the last card we'll look at here is Winter, Cursed Rider. Creature, human warlock, 3/2 with ward, 13 mana. Black and blue. Ward, pay 6 life. Interesting. When this creature enters the battlefield, a random non-token support you control gains 3 shield. Okay. When an artifact support you control is destroyed or loses a reinforcement, your opponent loses 3 life. Okay, that is interesting. Exhaust. Exile all cards from all graveyards. Interesting. Then all opposing creatures get -X/-X. X is the number of artifact cards in play and in exile. All right, so there's actually, I kind of like this card, to be honest. There are things I can do with this. I don't think I have this card yet, but if I do, I'm definitely going to play around with it and come up with some fun things to do with it. So an artifact support you control is destroyed or loses a reinforcement. If you fill your side of the board up with clue tokens, and every time you break one, your opponent's going to be losing life. So that alone is very cool. However, if you pair that also with Ob-Nixilis, Captive Kingpin, you're going to be triggering him every time a clue token is broken. So that is actually very awesome. So I definitely want to try this card with certain things happening. I think that this might do very well with my deck that has Mind Skinner and Ob-Nixilis. Ashiok 2 is the play there. So yeah. And then the exiling cards from graveyard. That could be also relevant. But that one might be a little bit tricky to play at the right time. I'm really going to be playing it more for that effect of artifact support, destroying or losing a reinforcement, your opponent losing 3 life. That can get out of control. So this one's definitely, this is fun. I don't think it's going to be meta impacting because that type of deck is going to be so niche. This kind of card really kind of gets my gears turning. So personally for me, I'm going to put this at the top end of fun, because this is the type of card that I like to go and try and break. All right, there we have it. I went through all the mythics and masterpieces from Ether Drift and decided that it's going to be a lot of cards that might be fun to play around with. A handful of meta impacting cards. I know for sure the top 3 and maybe 4 meta impactors are going to stay there. Everything else, I think, is a little bit in flux. Oh, and I do think the Brightglass Gearhulk is going to be a god tier card, no matter what. So that really makes it so that there are 10 chase cards in the high rarity of this set, which is, okay. it's not as bad as maybe I thought it was, but really I only think Brightglass Gearhulk is going to be the one must-have card from this set. But we'll see. As the meta shifts and people get more of these cards and find new combos and everything, there's potential for things to move up and down. So I'll be revisiting this tier at the end of the set and see where things moved, if they do or not. And yeah, hope you're there. And I'll probably start doing some Chase or Not. I don't think I'll do every single card for Chase or Not this time around. I feel like the ones that I already have explained here as ones to avoid, I'm going to avoid making a video for as well. But we will look at everything from fun up to God tier. Well, I won't have the God tier until next set's release because it's an exclusive. And yeah, that one definitely deserves to be an exclusive. This is a longer video than I expected to be, and I'm rambling. So thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll see you there.